So what's the matter with this computer?
It's old.
Get your boogie on. Get your boogie on.
Are we all ready? Can you hear me? All right. Anyway, welcome tonight this is our first lecture of the 2023-24 series. And I just want to say right off that as a board member, I'm not a speaker. I am barely making it at 75. No, I'm doing fine. But I'm also known now as Charles's dad. So that's my son's doing Papa Joe, so I'm Charles's dad now. I'm not George Hertel anymore. So anyway, so they're scraping the bottom of the boards to get people like me to do this stuff. Our annual lecture series has become a very popular tradition in our community, a time when the past comes alive. We've missed the hustled application before the lectures begin, the shared moments of revelation and the lively discussion that follows. But now we're back with a bang, I guess a bang. We are happy to see you here, for sure, and it looks like a great crowd. And I like everybody's color of their hair, so it's really, I told them I wasn't going to stay on script, so we're so happy to see you here. Welcome to our virtual attendees that are watching live, which are probably turned off by now. So all over the country and the universe. So, and don't forget, each of our lectures are recorded, and as members, you can review them anytime through the members portal on our website. And if you're not yet a member, we'd love to have you one, and we need your support. Oops. I'll get this right. I wanted one of those readers out here like our president uses. So, we are thrilled to announce the return of our much beloved lunch and learn session we're doing now. These are more than just a meal. They're a delightful complement to our lecture experience. Our first session will take place Monday, December 4th, and will feature, Magna del... Well, I mean, I'm never going to get this one right. I'll put it on the website for you. It's to examine the migrational settlement patterns of various Afro-Caribbean people who made Florida their homes and their contribution to the history and our culture. We received such an incredible response to our recent series titles, Growing Up in the Keys, and they're still growing, as you can see up here. They haven't changed at all. If you look at those pictures, boy, that's scary. As you know, this is Monroe County's 200th anniversary. We wanted to bring you some of the more stories of what it was like growing up in the Keys in the 50s and the 60s. I got down here around 1960 and moved down here about 84, and that was the Islamorada Fish Company part of it. So. And anyway, I want to extend a heartfelt welcome to our 2023 lecture series sponsors, Joe and Lindy Roth Foundation. Thanks Bob and Patty Lodge for sponsoring our fall series lecture reception. And Bob, if you're watching, I know you're sitting there with a martini in your hand, and I don't have mine. So anyway, the program is also funded by the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs. And none would be possible without the cooperation and the support of our partner, the Islander Resort, and we really appreciate all the things they do for us here. So I'm almost done. So before we begin, let's make sure your cell phones are in, they're muted or turned off, or leave them at the door. I could use a new one. Tonight we are pleased to present our state representative Jim Mooney and Pastor Tony Hammon, both who graduated from Coral Shores in the 1960s. Holy crap. And they're still here. What does that make me? All right, Representative Mooney has been a school teacher, coach, small business owner, mayor, city council member, and currently our representative in the state of Florida. He has served on countless boards and organizations, including Take Stock in Children, FKC, Islamorada Chamber of Commerce, and the Upper Keys Foundation. Mr. Hammond is pastor emeritus of Island Christian School and was a teacher of biology and marine science at Coral Shores High. He also taught physics and coached baseball and drove a bus. Which one was your best one? That was a bus. Anyway, driving the bus. Okay. And he taught Sunday school. Pastor Hammon also served as the president of the International Association of Christianity Colleges and Schools and is on the board of directors of the Florida Association of Christianity Colleges and Schools. The discussion will be moderated by our board chair, Richie Russell. What an honor. But I do want to acknowledge we have, I can't read Richie's writing. So Whitney Trantine's here and Phyllis Mitchell. They're board members and they should raise their hand or stand up. And one of our past members for many years is Dick Salem. Anyway, thanks for coming. Anyway, welcome, and I'm done, and it's martini time. I'll be sitting in the back.
Thank you, George, and I extend the same welcome. It's great to have you guys back. This is obviously our first lecture series for the fall, and it's a great crowd given the fact that this is our first one. George mentioned our board members that are present. I also want to recognize folks that are just so critical to our importance, or critically important to our success, and that's our volunteers. Raise your hand if you have served in that capacity here at the center. Thank you so much. And I might add to that, there are spots available. So we encourage, if you have an interest in some spare time, please speak to Hannah, and we will get that. We'll make those arrangements. It is a privilege for me tonight to be on the same dais as Jimmy and Tony. We could spend really the rest of the night doing their bio, but I thought we'd save some time for some good stories, and they've got a ton of them. How many people remember when you were like back in 4th and 5th grade? Can you remember that? Good. That's most of us. Well, I started watching Tony and Jimmy play football and baseball, and then in Jimmy's case, running track. And I admired them and truly idolized them and their teammates. They were my heroes. They later would both coach me in sports, and Tony was my marine biology teacher, and I've said this in many forums. He's the best teacher I've ever had. At any level, and then we just transitioned to being good friends. The one constant, though, is my admiration for both of them. They have been and continue to be significant difference makers in the Upper Keys, and well beyond, I should say. I count it a privilege and a blessing to be a part of capturing some of their stories and growing up in the Keys tonight, and I think this is going to be a special event. Hopefully we'll have some time for some of your questions, but as we do typically with this, I'm going to ask if you would just give a quick bio, like when you came down to the Keys. We'll start with Tony and go to Jim, and then we'll move on to section 2.
Well, let's see. The first time I came to Alamorado was 1952. I was 6 years old, and I was here on vacation, stayed at the Islander, and bet you didn't know that, did you? And I was adopted by my grandparents, and we lived in a farmhouse in Oklahoma, in a very rural region of Oklahoma. Had no running water, used the outhouse. So when we came to the Florida Keys, we thought that was, wow, we have arrived. And we came back. My brother, some of you knew, / uncle, because of the adoption, was a avid tarpon fisherman. And he and Ted Williams would compete back and forth in the Gold Cup tournaments. And a little bit of trivia. Ted Williams lived in a little house right back here behind the History and Discovery Center. And when I was a kid, I would go, I moved here in 1960. Right after Hurricane Donna, there was a car sticking out of our living room that Donna had washed in there. And we had to wait until that car was taken out of the living room and the house was restored. And the house is now gone. It was a little house on the north side of Burger King on the old highway. And I would go get Ted's memorabilia out of the woods that had washed everything over there. And so to me, he was just a neighbor. And one day he said, "Hey kid, can you use this?" And he tossed me a ball glove. And being a typical kid, I used it up and lost it somewhere. I have no idea what happened to that glove. Wish I still had it. But anyway, I moved to the Keys in 1960, was in 6th grade. And I was a hick of hicks. I was really an Okie. And I was in culture shock. It was the most incredible thing. And then one of my very first early friends was this guy named Jim Mooney. And we grew up just a stone's throw away from each other and lived here in Alamorada our whole life, and as did many of you that are sitting out here right now. And just as a disclaimer, almost everything that we talk about tonight, the statute of limitations has passed, so we should be okay. But it was a different world growing up in Alamorada in the 1960s.
Jim?
Thank you, Rich, and thank you. What a great turnout. So I moved here when I was 6. My parents were divorced, and I stayed with my great-grandparents in Miami. And they were founders of some of the first grocery stores in South Florida back in the early 1900s. So I was used to growing up on top of a grocery store. And then my mother and my stepfather and my little brother went to Cuba, and then we know what happened shortly thereafter. They ended up landing in Alamorada, at which point I moved here full-time instead of coming on the Greyhound bus every weekend at what seemed like 150 miles an hour riding the double-decker Greyhound bus, fearing for my life as a 4- and 5-year-old. But that in those days, you would put a kid in the bus, and that's how you got here without any parental oversight. So those days are long gone, we know. So fast forward, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm living on a grocery store. I got free popcorn, and now I'm down here with these things called mosquitoes, and it's hot. There's no air conditioning, and we were like, what is going on here? And so my parents ended up, my stepdad, my mom, Pop, I call him. He was a fishing guide. My mom worked the Green Turtle triple shifts. He'd fish all day, be a bartender at night. And so I basically get off the school bus at Green Turtle. And again, Tony shows up in town, and it was like instantaneous. We did not converse on how we would dress tonight. It's pretty.
I promise we did not do that.
How close we really are.
Full disclaimer.
In heart, we were college roommates. But you know, I have 2 children. Michael's here. My daughter's up in Palm Beach, and my mom is watching on video tonight from Lake Placid along with my sister. So yeah, it's going to be a fun night, and can't wait to get started.
Yeah.
With that being said, Tony, one of the things that we kick things off with is a personal story that could only happen to a kid growing up in the Keys. Can you share one of those?
One. You know, we were talking before we started. Now we were talking about the night we had to spend the night on Alligator Light. We climbed up in there because we were fishing, and it got so rough that we climbed up in the light, and they were restoring the light at the time. And so the beds were all made. There were sodas in the refrigerator. It's a good thing there were no beers in the refrigerator, because we would have had those too. But there were, and in the middle of the night, it got so rough that they asked me to, I drew the short straw and had to go down and try to retie the boat because it was banging around so bad. And I stepped off the ladder out there at Alligator, and the boat dropped into the trough, and I free fell for, it seemed like 100 feet. It was nothing, but my knees went all the way through the deck, and I did get the thing tied off, and we had a blast. And then that was one of the stories. And then we used to wait out there and jump on various creatures that would swim by, alligator, and we had a good time. So there's 1,000 of those stories.
We're just getting started. Jimmy, how about you? A story.
Yeah,
growing
so
up in
you
the
know,
Keys.
there was another counterpart right here. Kenny Knutson was on that trip to the lighthouse. I don't know if there was beer involved or not. I don't think there was, but for sure, Kenny thinks there was beer involved. Statute of limitations is officially in place. You know, there's so many stories, but honestly, some of the craziest things, just to start off, is Kenny and I used to play roller derby with boats. And in Snapper Creek, right here by Worldwide, there's a little cut, and we would see if we could ram into somebody broadside as they went by. Now, in hindsight, obviously, that shows a complete lack of intelligence on our part. But then again, we really didn't have much to do around here except try and die on our own cause. So, I mean, and, you know, jumping on sharks, we'd run the flats and jump on sharks. And then one day, one of my best memories is Kenny jumping on a sawfish. And it's one thing to jump on a shark. It's another thing to jump on a fish that has teeth outside of its mouth. And I looked at Kenny, I said, dear God, Kenny, what are we doing? He's like, this is fun, isn't it? I'm like, let's keep doing it. So, you know, but again, those stories will go on.
I'm trying to flip over here to And I may need to get some help from Hannah. I tried this prior too, and it worked just fine. Hannah, how do I, what should I be pointing at? Thank you. I'm technologically challenged.
While they're doing
Well, keep
that,
going.
I'll follow up on the shark story, because one day Coach Allen, who blamed us for everything, called me in one time and said, "Boys, I know you didn't have anything to do with the sawfish hanging out in front of the school." I went out there and he said, "But I want that sawfish gone immediately." And I went out. I hadn't had anything to do with it. I still, to this day, I think it was probably Artie Gasser, but I can't prove that. I have no idea who in the world put that sawfish out there. But there was about a 12-foot sawfish hanging up on a tree. And we hooked it to the back of my motorcycle, tied a rope around the tail, and we rode it down the old road. And we dumped it in the pool in front of what's now Treasure Village. Back then it was McKee's Sunken Treasure. It was much thinner by the time we got it down there after rubbing it. And when I came back to teach at Coral Shores, that oil slick was still there on the old road. And I swear I did not have anything to do with the capturing of that fish.
There's somebody in this audience that did, though. I'm sure of it.
That's right.
I'm convinced there is somebody in this audience that had something to do with that sawfish.
Yep.
But we were innocent.
We're moving on to a picture. By the way, there's some surfing pictures that we'll come back to, but I want to move on to a hero of ours, and I'm included one back, please, two back.
Oh, yeah.
That was the football team. This is Coach Allen, but the one just before that is pictures of Roger Allen, and that's your prompt. Go for it.
Roger was really the kind of human being that you met once in a lifetime, besides your own parents. He had everything to do with, I think, shaping us. He was not always happy with us, for sure, because we were a little bit rowdy. Once with Tony, I had the same story because we both asked him the same question. Have I ever done anything right? He says, absolutely nothing I can remember. That was just like, really, coach? And he's like, well, you did drop the ball in 67 and we've been state champions. I'm like, but he hit it over the portables, coach. He said, well, you should have caught it. You were fast. I'm like, but that's not right, coach. But Coach Allen was a mentor. We have a few stories maybe we can tell about some traveling to Miami to play some baseball and football, and then having to empty the school bus out. We'll let Tony start with that. He's the elder up here. But Roger Allen was a man that even my son had for a short time when he was at Coral Shores. He was truly an icon and a hero in this community, and he helped shape David and Kenny and Tommy and Arthur to the best he could. Now who else had Roger in here, but he was a great man.
How many of you guys were coached by Roger Allen?
Yeah.
Other than I wrote about him in Bone of My Bone and said he was like my dad and had more influence in my life than I'll ever probably realize. And certainly in my coaching. Jimmy did something earlier. What does that mean? Means you better take one, right? You better not swing at that ball. And that was Roger Allen. If you ever did swing at that ball, you were in trouble. Jimmy Asker, I was telling about, one night we went to the Orange Bowl, and Jimmy and I used to be able to stay at his grandmother's house, and for nothing almost, you could go see University of Miami play football, and you could go for $1 and sit in the end zone and watch the Dolphins. Jimmy and I stayed at his grandmother's. We'd take the bus over, and we saw Miami Dolphins and Kansas City Chiefs, I think the first game at the Orange Bowl, if I remember correctly. Those are some phenomenal times. But we were up there with the football team one time, and we stopped at a stoplight, and guys behind us jumped out of their car and took off a shoe and broke the back window out of the bus. I had no idea that. I guess it was a busload of football players. And Coach Allen, as Jimmy said, must have sneezed. Yeah. But he's going, boys, you shouldn't do that. You probably should get back on the bus, because we piled out of the bus, drug the guys out of the car, and we were just pounding these guys at the stoplight. And then we climbed back on the bus and went on. And Coach Allen just kept right on going. That's
You're
a
not
Roger.
doing that in today's world. But I don't think they broke any more school bus windows out after that.
Yeah,
either.
yeah. That was the last window we broke.
You were talking about holding up a finger, which is take pictures. There's a great story, and Ron Saunders is with us, hopefully our next supervisor of elections. But Ron, you will know Randy Sterling, who was the first round draft pick, I think by the Mets, if I'm not mistaken, but tremendous pitcher. And tell your story, Jim.
Yeah, well, so they stick the finger up like this, and so we're playing down in Key West in the big stadium back in those days, a real stadium, and I'm the leadoff hitter. I get the take one because the guy throws 100 miles an hour, and I've never seen it, and I just hit a home run. And I come back to the bench, and he goes, "What does this mean?" I said, "It means take one." He says, "Did you take it?" I said, "No, I hit a home run, coach." He says, "Yeah, that's the last swing you got today." Like, you can't do that, coach. I'm your star. Well, in my mind, I was a star, obviously. I wasn't the star of the team. But got benched the rest of the game. That really hurt. So as Tony and I coached, we reminded everybody we coached, including Richie, what does this mean? And they took it to heart.
Richie was a sophomore when we first started coaching in 1972, and he was a catcher and a first baseman, depending on who we had on the mound, and was one of the best baseball guys that we coached.
Well, you said that with a straight face. That wasn't.
No, I meant that. I still mean that. And
Well,
I played softball with him for years, and I can tell you that he had a serious amount of ability.
Well, it was a thrill again being able to have you guys as coaches. And as you talked about Coach Allen, I see Kenny and I see David and I see Tom, all these folks that played for him. You know, I think that we went into coaching, myself included, and into education because we wanted to be like Coach Allen. And I think he was that much of a hero to us. And our lofty goal was to somehow or another have the impact on people that he had on others. And I fell well short, but I think we're all that he was an amazing man.
Well, he would, I didn't have any choice. I was hired. He was the principal, only baseball coach Coral Shores had had. And he called me and he says, "Lefty, you're the baseball coach." I had right out of college, and I'm taking over from a guy who was the icon of icons of Coral Shores baseball. You talk about being set up to fail. It was, man, oh man, did I know so little and learn so much.
But, on that, Roger's probably rolling over his grave considering that we have done okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But trust me, we weren't okay. We were not good students at all. I mean, we had a teacher named Mr. Gillette that said, 25-page report by Friday, you don't play. He didn't say how many words had to be in a page. So after 25 words, I was completing my assignment as told to do. And I literally wrote 25 words to play on Friday night. But, a lot of what happened has direct relationship to the sports. Obviously, we're very well connected at the hip, as all of us are in this room. While such a small town, sports was a big part of our lives. I do remember one time we're out there, and the reason I ran track is because we had lost that game, according to Coach, my fault. So he says, "You're going to run track on Monday." And Tony and I are going, "Track? We're going surfing on the reef. We're not going to track." We didn't go to track practice on Monday. We did go surfing. Shortly thereafter, we did go to track practice as told. But that was the beginning of our career in surfing to some degree. Skimboarding at Chica Lodge, where the condos now are, and that was the driving range that Jack Nicklaus designed.
1962 was about when that all was happening.
Yeah, so.
Here's a piece of track trivia that Jimmy was the first student athlete in Monroe County to make it to the state level and in sprints. He advanced in both the 100 and the 200. And as I remember the story, you told it, but I think you were at the 3/4 mark and actually first in the heat. And then you said something about a piano got a hold of you or something.
No, the finals weren't pretty. I thought I had it won, but some of these guys were pretty quick from Miami. One guy asked me, he said, "How long have you been running?" I said, 3 weeks. I said, "How about you?" He goes, 7 years. I'm like, "Oh, okay." So then barefoot, it's not easy to run barefoot in the track either, but we didn't have much around here in those days, and barefoot was our normal shoe wear.
Well, the fact that we called it track is somewhat of a misnomer because we didn't have a track.
No, we ran over on Coral Avenue behind by Kahiki Harbor. That was our track up the hill.
But Jimmy could fly. If you would move up to the next one, because I think we got a few folks in the. This is why don't you narrate this? I see Donnie Carrick in there. Said Tony. I see Kenny and see Jimmy back there. We got
Lee Rowe,
Johnny.
Charlie Broom, John Reeves, Jimmy Mulhern,
Jay
let's see,
Sparkman.
Colby, Jay Sparkman.
Yeah, that was a good team. You know, we started playing six-man football here originally. It was a blast. So
Yes, it
speed,
was.
Speed was everything. And then one day, my son and my daughter's mom, which was later on in life, her father decided we should play Coral Gables. Coral Gables. Score was predicted 150-0, and then it certified that at halftime. But at halftime it was 7-0, and we were holding our own there for a while. And then shortly thereafter, I became the quarterback after Dale Crawshaw was out and Don Beck was out. So my claim to fame in football was chasing down a guy who won the gold medal in the Olympics after I threw the interception. That was my claim to fame.
The thing I remember is we were circled up, we're doing our calisthenics before the game, you know, all 10 of us or however many there were. And we looked up and Coral Gables were running all these guys out of the locker room still, and they were already circling up on the field. I mean, they must have dressed 50 plus people. And, you know, here we were run to death.
Yeah, it was crazy, but it was fun.
It was fun.
We did beat QS JV though. That was good. Predicted to lose that. That was Saunders was probably on that team. But you know, Tony did live across the street, and where the new Wendy's is going to be.
Yep.
Is where Tony and I built our first surfboards.
That's right.
Right in that field, and that was the beginning. You know, the drag racing stories at Luke's, which is now he was Uncle's there for a while.
Uncle's,
It was called
Luke's.
Luke's Pool Hall back in the day, and that's where the drag racing occurred.
Yep.
On a nightly basis, basically. And I think Makepeace was part of setting up the drag racing, and then somehow dodged before the police turned up. David, thumbs up. Yes, thank you, David.
Dave was so
He may have
good.
been the flag guy.
Dave Makepeace was a smart guy in school. So he would instigate all this stuff, and then he would leave right before the police would show up, right before anybody got in trouble. He was probably the one that told us we should climb the tower in Alamorada.
Yeah, there used to be a little AT&T tower or whatever they called it back in those days behind Uncle's. And yes, we ended up on top of that one night. And then all of a sudden the Q beams came on and like, well, apparently we're not supposed to be up here.
Deputy said, boys, come down right now with the spotlight on us. And
And we did go to a square building with bars on the windows and stuff. It was really odd. So it didn't seem like it was home.
one of the guys got scared and started to jump about halfway down. We were able to grab him and keep him from jumping. And another one, Scotty Donbeck, some of you know who Scotty was. Scotty jumped over the fence and ran away. But because we were all caught, he began to feel guilty, and he came walking back out of the woods. And the deputy said, gentlemen, do you know this young man? He said, no, sir, we've never seen him in our life. He said, yeah, right, get in the car.
That was Mr. Pinder. Of course we knew him. We did go, they didn't actually lock us in jail. They just took us to the jailhouse. And
That's right.
Where
That's
Scotty's father did come and say, if that's the worst thing they do, I'm good with that. And he took us all home, which was, yes, we won again.
Yeah, David was obviously the valedictorian of your class, and
Yes.
he was the guy who made the phone call. I hear about these drag racing stories, and what I caught of it is they would make a phone call to the police. I think there was Lee Pinder, and who was the other one that was down here?
Lee Pinder.
Yeah, with Lee and somebody else.
Warren Felton.
Warren Felton, exactly. And they would call and say that there was a wreck in Key Largo. And so whoever was on duty would go work the wreck, and then they'd have the drag races and so forth to the south of that.
Well, you drag race in front of Luke's, and they'd run us out of there. So we go to the Phil, and of course you could see the car lights coming. So we always had the lookouts, and back in those days was a wayside tables along the Phil, and understand there was no cars here in those days. I mean, literally no cars.
No.
Tony and I had actually his wife, and we had girlfriends at that time in Key Largo. So we'd hitchhike to Key Largo, which means we basically walked to Key Largo because a car would go by every 3 hours.
Yeah.
And so we learned how to walk really well back in the day.
It's
Jimmy,
amazing.
you guys mentioned the Phil. Let everybody know what the Phil was, because that's somewhat significant now.
Oh, the Phil's significant. In this town, it is.
No, I was thinking about down at Port Antigua and the beach and so forth, where you guys, or the strip down there where you guys used to race from time
Yeah,
to
most of you
time.
don't even know there's an airstrip on the highway.
White Marlin Beach. Yeah, there was an airstrip
Yeah.
in Key Largo at Port Largo, right?
And
drag
our
strip.
parties at White Marlin Beach were, in those days, White Marlin Beach were intense, to say the least. Intense.
We used to tie a hood of a car, throw it in the canal, tie it on the back of a car, and we would jump on that hood and ride down those canals. Like early days of some kind of a surfboard or something. I don't know what it was, and I think there are probably some cars still in those canals that we ended up dropping off in there.
Speaking of surfing,
I don't recall those cars being in canals, just so you know.
these guys were both elite surfers for this area. We're going to go back to take a look at 7, 8, and 9 here. Some of the shots.
That's the original surfmobile back there that you just saw. That was like a 1948 Plymouth, and that was in my yard. And that other board was a board that I just reshaped for my grandson.
Yeah, my first board I built actually went through 3 of my former students and passed on to his son finally, the Purple Monster. I don't know how it can possibly float at this point, but surfing was a lot of fun. We used to surf at Bay Honda, and very few people know how good the surf was at Bay Honda back in the day. Before it was a state park. Sandspur Beach, obvious reason for that. You couldn't walk on it, you'd shuffle. But we have a little story about Sandspur and a friend of ours who may or may not be in the audience tonight, Mr. Catonhead.
Yeah. I don't see Van here. I don't know why Van wouldn't be here tonight.
I don't know why Van wouldn't be here either. Maybe his ears would probably burning. So we're driving to Bay Honda. We got the surfboards. We think we're cool. We got the zinc oxide. Everything is definitely on our side of the table. And Van decides to moon this girl behind us in the car. Well, they get the license tag, and lo and behold, well, you parked in those days, just park side of the road. And then here come the officers, and Tony says this one best.
Yeah. Oh man. So we were all sitting out on our surfboards in the lineup, and we look out, and there's a deputy walking, and he's about waist deep in the water walking toward us. And he starts hollering, I'm looking for Van Catonhead. And being such good, loyal friends, we all go. But we honestly, I don't believe we knew at the time what had happened. And because Van was always doing something like that, and so I don't think he got in real serious trouble, but we didn't paddle in to find out either. So
no, we did not paddle in to find out. And it's funny, Tony touched on when he first stayed here at the Islander. Few people know that Tony and I were bellhops at the Islander when they actually had bellhops here.
That's right.
And lo and behold, you're not supposed to, if you're an employee here, you're not supposed to see any of the guests. Well, we're teenagers, and in those days, kids actually travel with their parents. So Tony and I happened to luck upon these 2 gorgeous little girls at the time. I don't know, we were probably 13, 12, 14, I don't know. Yep. They were the same age, like, wow. And they were all fun. We're sitting there having fun, and here comes Mr. Samuels. He chased us down that old road with a golf club, literally with a golf club. I'm going to kill you guys. Well, he couldn't catch us. I mean, obviously, he wasn't going to catch me. I'm not Tony. I left Tony in the dust. Sorry about your luck, Tony.
Mr. Samuels was fun to work for. We had to wear these dorky red vests and little white shirts and bow ties. And the antics that we would do, I remember we'd go out on the dock, and people at night would catch sharks. And there was a saltwater pool sort of out between the units over here. And we would catch those sharks and say, you want to see something cool? Watch this. And we'd throw the sharks in the pool and then come back the next morning to watch and see who would see the sharks in the pool for the first time. And of course, the sharks would all be dead because of the chlorine and things in the salt water. And that was all lots of fun until a guy started to jump in, an older guy, and he started having chest pains. He grabbed his chest. And we said, it's probably not a good idea to be dumping sharks in there.
It's probably the reason both of us study marine biology, because we feel guilty about what we did as kids. But again, growing up here was just the stories we could just go on. But Kenny Knutson and David, we camped out in the backcountry all the time. My mom is 92 and she's just getting over some illness right now, but she's still mad at me for disappearing for 3 days at 9 without calling. Well, you can't call from Rabbit Key. You're fishing. So I mean, when imagine your 9-year-old, 10-year-old just taking off for 3 days and not contacting you in today's world. It's just, you don't understand what you did. I don't understand what I did to my mom until I became a parent. But we did stupid stuff like that. I mean, jumping off Bay Honda Bridge.
Yes.
That is not really intelligent. Obviously, the lack of intelligence is clearly evident up here.
I think we did pay Van one time to jump off a bridge, and it was only about 4 inches of water down below. And he survived.
Yeah, yeah.
But that may explain a lot.
It may explain a lot. But, you know,
Sorry,
we
man.
also really learned how to surf, though, on Conch Reef. That's where we really learned how to surf.
Yeah.
And then from there, we would start driving every Saturday to Wabasso, Vero, the Monster Hole at Sebastian Beach, and then Cocoa, Daytona.
We could
And-
camp at Wabasso, where the Disney
The Disney's at.
resort is. We could camp there for a week, and nobody would ever come and bother you. And it was so much fun. Harlan Richardson,
Yep.
Steve Toby, all those guys would be with us. That young lady.
Give a little narrative of what we have, that both the car and
Yeah, that's
The young lady
that's
that's
Colleen
coming.
and me at Wabasso, actually, back in about that time frame.
Yeah,
She was my high school
That car was hot top end, about 40 miles an hour. People screaming at us in 826 was then basically the freeway.
Yeah.
You get to tell us to get off the highway and just shooting us birds. And I mean, it was bad. We're like, yeah, we're going good. We're good. Made it all the way.
Yeah,
Made it back.
yeah. We tied the boards on with rope. One time we were on the way up, and one of the cars caught on fire, and the guys were all worried about getting the fire put out in the car. I said, forget the car, get the boards. And so we were quick. We had to climb in and out of the windows because everything was tied together, and we'd have 6, 8 boards on top of the car.
so we saw Tony and Colleen. This is Jimmy surfing or
Yep.
working in that direction.
Working in the soup.
Yeah, the soup. I forgot what direction I was going to go. I was going to ask, oh, you mentioned Van. If you would, could you switch to number 20? I want to show you, we got a picture of Jimmy, we got a picture of Tony, and we got a picture of Van from back in the day. Sorry here, I'm making it really difficult on him. We'll come back to this.
That's
by the way.
sodding. We'll talk more about that, but that's an important picture there.
And this is a neat picture we'll come back to as well. So that's Van, but this is believe it or not, Van was once a good-looking guy. That's him on the top left, and then Jimmy, I think, was in 9th grade. I took the picture out of the annual, and Tony might have been a junior, and then this is the updated version.
That was when I had a wig.
Yeah, you had a ton of hair. Actually, there was a really pretty neat picture that needs an explanation. If you could switch to number 2, Hannah.
Oh, number 2. All right. So Jimmy and I, this is about the time the Beatles were coming in, and Jimmy and I had been surfing and diving and playing around in the summer, and we hadn't bothered to get a haircut. So we showed up for football practice for our 2-a-days, and Coach Allen comes in and says, you girls are not going to get on the football field with hair like that. Now, back then, we only had 2 barbers. You guys that grew up here, you know this. We had Cal, and who was the other one? Red. And one of them, I can't remember which one, his hand shook so bad that there's nobody who would go to him because you're afraid he'd chop your ears off. But Coach Allen, Cal, okay, so Kenny knows. So Coach Allen had called and made sure neither one of those guys would cut our hair. The only place left was a little beauty shop right over here on the other side of the Islander. And it was called Edie Lipford's. And we went into Edie's, a beauty parlor. And they had it all set up. Man, we walked in, it was like, oh, here come the ladies. They're so pretty. And so Jimmy remembers it as, I think, we didn't get our haircut that day.
No, we walked out. We're not getting a haircut from a beauty parlor, for God's sakes. I'd rather get my ear lopped off from Cal with the straight razors. That's what he used.
And we did what?
So we go back to school, and of course, we're immediately suspended. So, well, that actually worked out quite well because it was early in the day, so we could make it to Bay Honda easily by noon. Surfboards, Bay Honda, surf all day, come back to school the next day. Figured we're only kicked out for one day. Show up again, like, you can't come back to school. You get a haircut. So, well, okay. We're back to Bay Honda. Surf was breaking great, so we're back to Bay Honda we went. So we thought we became geniuses that day. So how do you win this battle? We're not going to win it with our hair. So we're like, we'll take Mr. Adair back some coconuts. Some little coconut plants we got. Again, not a state park in those days. So we bring back a bunch of coconuts and go, look, Mr. Adair, we brought you coconuts. And he actually was so appreciative. He actually planted them in his yard where Lee Young's brother now lives. And I think at least one of those palm trees is still alive. And so we thought, well, we're smooth now. We're good. But we ended up ultimately getting a haircut.
Like that picture, I just got it buzzed.
Yeah, there you go. That was long hair in those days.
And that short hair on the other side over there, that was after we finally surrendered.
It's not easy to surrender to your own, internal victories. But
Yeah.
we lost as usual.
We flipped through something earlier, and I was going to see if we could get back to it on number 15, if you could, Hannah. I'm driving her crazy over there. My apologies. She's doing an amazing job. But this was a really neat night in Upper Keys history, and I think it's sort of endemic of how great a community we had. It's one of the several times we came together for a common cause. But this was a night that it was decided that we would grass the football field. That we'd actually have a football field.
Yeah, so we basically were playing on conch shells, and there was just sand, and literally staph infection ran wild with any athlete at Carl Shores in those days. And so Uncle Sid and Aunt Roxy from the Green Turtles said, we will give you the proceeds if you guys bust tables. So all the team went and bust tables. They donated proceeds. We bought the sod. Pete Perdue also at that point chipped in a lot of money involved. We ended up with a scoreboard from the Orange Bowl through a donation from Pete. And then and once the sod was down, we still had to get it. We had to make it grow. And then, don't give the keys to the fire truck to teenagers. Let's put it that way.
We would get the fire trucks from Tavernier Fire Department and water the field with a fire truck, if you can imagine that.
Just have teenagers driving the fire truck down the road. Lee Rowe, I believe, was driving it, and of course, got all of us with the fire hose on the. Yeah, what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong with teenagers in a fire truck on a football field? Everything went wrong.
Before we sodded the field, you could always tell who played football because we had 3 dots in our chin. Dot here, dot here, dot here, because those are the holes in the chin straps. And when you hit the gravel and the coral rock, you always, so it was a badge of honor to have these 3 dots on your chin from that stayed sore the entire time we played football.
Yeah.
If you would, Hannah, I'm going to have you switch over a couple to number 17. There's folks that played a significant role here. There's Jimmy. How many people recognize some folks in that at all? Raise your hand. Okay, I figured some of you'd recognize everybody. To the right is Donnie Carrick, and you guys play baseball, obviously, with Donnie and football, basketball. But you want to share a little bit about what became of Donnie? Whatever happened to Donnie?
He just disappeared.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. 3-star general.
Yeah. Yeah. Highest ranking military, started out as a private, right?
Yeah.
And the last picture I saw of him he was on Air Force One with one of the presidents.
Carter.
And
I'm sorry. No, it wasn't. It was Bill Clinton. He was the liaison between the Pentagon and the White House.
Right. And then he was right before 9/11, he was at the Pentagon, and I called him to make sure he was okay. And he had retired. He had just retired from the Pentagon military.
So he went to I think Florida Southern, if I'm not mistaken. He went to ROTC. So he started out, at the lowest of the levels, and he ended up as a lieutenant general, a 3-star. And as I mentioned before, he was the gentleman who represented President Clinton and signed the Bosnia Treaty, among other things. So a little bit of prominence. He's now living up in Jupiter. He sneaks down here every once in a while, goes fishing, and he's on our Upper Keys Foundation advisory board. And then the guy to the left here, all the way to the left, is Mariano Jimenez. And Mariano and his brother Bert were actually the first Cuban Americans to come to the Upper Keys, students to come to the Upper Keys. And I actually contacted Mariano today. By the way, subsequent to graduation, he goes by Jose, who is the middle name. A tremendous musician. He's a singer, songwriter. He's a guitarist and keyboardist. Has great missions work going on. That's continued for years. He's up in New Jersey right now. But on on July 5th of 1961, he and his older brother, Bert, who's a close friend of Tony's as well, they flew into Miami. They were in Kendall for a couple weeks, and they ended up staying with my Aunt Melissa and Uncle Floyd for several months. His father had worked for my uncle down in Cuba. They had J. Morgan Jones publication, which was actually Mr. Jones created the physician's desk reference in the United States, and they expanded that to Latin America. So this is what Jose or Mariano said today. So over the next few weeks, I met the Keys kids who became lifelong friends: Tony Hammon, Dale Crawshaw, Eleanor Moore, Becky Boatwright, Richie and Juanita Russell, just to name a few. First week of August, I enrolled in 7th grade at Coral Shores, and I've always proudly considered myself a conch for life. And it certainly broke some ground. And Bert was 5 years older. He would actually enter Coral Shores same timing. We graduate in 1962. But special people, and then if you knew their parents, how many people knew Miss Elena? How many people were taught by Miss Elena? Anybody?
Wow.
I was taught by her
Is that Corey?
in
Yeah,
kindergarten,
Corey.
her first kindergarten class, and just an incredible lady who I think probably impacted hundreds and hundreds of lives in the Upper Keys as a teacher. She went on to teach 2nd grade at Coral Shores. She was also a piano teacher. I drove her crazy with about 5 years of lessons. I think she might have gotten out of after me. And also his dad, Big Umberto, was continued to work in the publication here for a few years and then became a realtors. But they were, that was landmark. It really was. And 2 wonderful men. I know you can go beyond that.
Good memories of Jose. He was in my class, and we became best buddies, and we're still good friends. And Elena ran the daycare center first at Matacumby Methodist for a long time, and we got on a plane. Back up real quick story. In 1967, I began to work as a teacher's aide at Coral Shores with special needs kids. I did that really to get out of having to take some other class, because class was punishment until you get to football practice or baseball practice. And but all of a sudden at the end of the year, they're giving out all these awards, and this group of retired teachers were giving out the most promising teacher award. And they said, in the most promising teacher this year, award goes to Mr. Tony Hammon. And I elbowed Dale Crawshaw next to me and said, do they ever have the wrong guy? I hope I never see another school.
Little did they really know what was going on behind closed doors.
Yeah. And so the next thing I knew, I was back on a government grant the year after I graduated, working at Coral Shores, going to Florida Keys Community College at Coral Shores and Marathon, driving back and forth. And then the following year, Jimmy and I were roommates in Key West, living in Boyd's campground on Stock Island. Ron, you'll recognize that. It's still there. It's not the same anymore.
It is not the same campground we lived in.
Yeah. And as Jimmy was reminiscing about, what movie was it we watched 9,000 times?
The Endless Summer, 9,000 times from the roof of that thing, overlooking the dog track, the drive-in movie theater, no sound, and then just living our life through that movie.
We didn't need the
chasing
sound
waves
because
around the world.
we knew every line to the movie,
Yeah.
so we didn't need to hear the sound.
We actually tried to talk our parents into letting us go to college in the Virgin Islands. That was
Yeah.
ruled out immediately because apparently the thought process was we would not be studying. So we said, well, we'll go to Puerto Rico. That's even a better university. That was immediately shot down. So we end up basically in the Keys. We're going to play baseball with a junior college in those days. And we went to practice, and we both got on the field, we're practicing. And then here comes these guys. I'm like, where in the hell did these guys come from?
Yeah.
And we're looking up at them. They're like, where'd you come from? Yeah, we don't grow them that big down here. They're all from New York. It was warm down there.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they're running like deers, hitting balls over the fence. And Tony, like you said, we should probably go surfing. It seemed like probably a better sport for us in the long run than trying to compete with these monsters.
3 of us, Guy Polson,
Yep, Guy Polson,
Jimmy,
great
myself.
athlete.
And it was fun. We played the fall season there, and then moved on.
Yep, moved on to the University of Miami, where our first lesson, where the first lesson we took was on 21st Street on a winter break, left break, 6 to 8,
Yep.
peeling. And then we realized we had to go to class.
Had to go to class.
Eventually, we did figure it out that we had to go to class eventually. Yeah.
Well, but you know, what you did actually was historical, and I went back and checked on that. You and the two of you and Guy Polson, as you mentioned before, became the first Coral Shores graduates to go on and play college baseball, even though it was a short term and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
One of the things
You
I
ended
remember
up
about
getting hurt, I remember, with your
my
finger.
memory that was the most memorable thing about playing down in Key West. We played at Wicker Stadium, which isn't even there anymore. But a guy came out and said, "Any of you guys ever receive, or were you ever a receiver in football in high school?" And Jimmy and I both, yes, we were. And he said, "Okay, I'm rehabbing. I need somebody to throw passes to." It was George Myra. And so we ran pass routes for George Myra, which was, you know, what an honor, what a privilege. And all the reputation about him throwing the ball 100 miles an hour was absolutely true. You'd catch the ball and sometimes you'd go airborne with it. He threw so hard.
Yeah, there was in Key West, a little story of there's a helicopter. We're surfing in Key West, and not many people realize there's pretty decent surf in Key West from time to time. And Tony and I could find surf anywhere. Believe me, that was our goal in life, to be surfers, nothing more. That's all we cared about.
Concrete,
So
alligator.
we're surfing in Key West off of Whitehead Pier there, and all of a sudden there's a helicopter. And I'll let Tony finish up the story.
Oh man, the helicopter kept coming down closer and closer and closer and closer over us. And then we looked and there were guys in black suits on the beach. "Gentlemen, please exit the water." So we paddled in. The guys in the suits met us, grabbed us. We had drifted over in front of the Truman Annex. And the president, I think it was Nixon at the time, was there. And so we were in presidential space, and we had to convince them that we were junior college students, not assassins, before we were released.
You notice there's a lot of law involved in our lives when we were young. A lot of law.
Now you know why I became a pastor.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you touched on Ted Williams. So Tony and I had the privilege of getting to clean Ted Williams' first Gold Cup victory. And he brings in 2 weight fish. And in those days, a kill tournament, we all are happy that's no longer in place. But in those days, a kill tournament. So he hangs up in front of the fishing club, and he gives us each $2, that's the gold mine. And we wash the tarpon off, and he goes inside, proceeds to have a few cocktails, and then a few more, and then a few more. And he comes back out in his little Red Sox socks. And, well, obviously the tarpon are bleeding out of the gills again. And he yells at us, takes our $2 back, and makes us wash the fish again. Now, Ted was a cordial kind of guy. So I also had the privilege of cooking Ted breakfast one morning when I was 10. My parents had Jack's Bar, which is now doesn't look the same, but it's a Bayside Gourmet, where I bought one of my surfboards in that back room there as well. But that bar is the original bar, and Ted sat at the left-hand seat there every single morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, my mother had told me there was pearls. If you wash dishes, you find pearls. So I'm all in for 50 cents an hour. And all of a sudden, Cotton, our chef, did not show up because he had happened to hit the bolita. The bolita is a little bit of the old early on lotto. And he hit it big, like $90,000 in those days, which he put his daughter through college. And so Ted wants his 3 pancakes, his 3 eggs runny, his sausage, bacon, ham, and a chocolate milkshake. Well, I mean, I watched Cotton make it 1,000 times. Like, well, I can do that. And I made Ted Williams' breakfast. I thought I made Ted his breakfast, and he actually ate it and didn't yell at me for a change. But
You know, we
Ted was quite a guy.
Yes, he was.
We spent an entire series on different areas of smuggling in the Keys and so forth. But you mentioned bolito, which was an illegal activity as well. You want to share exactly what bolito was? And we won't mention names for the Upper Keys participants. But Ron could probably chime in a little bit here too. You might have known a couple folks in Key West that were.
Yeah, I mean, all I knew was the names, and I remember it being a very under the table, and nobody really ever talked about it much. But I know these guys that all of a sudden would have a lot of money all of a sudden. And
yeah, it was just, I mean, basically it was lottery. They brought numbers out of Cuba back in those days, illegal, and that was just what was happening down here in those days. And So again, my parents had the bar. So every Friday, everybody would come cash their paychecks from the local guys here. And my mom knew that the paychecks would bounce for sure. And so she would give all the workers that come from the mainland their paycheck. They'd buy a pint. They would go back to the mainland. She'd hold the checks for a week. And then, but every Friday, the man would show up at the bar and the numbers would go out and there you go. I got the school bus once at the Jack's bar and this guy sitting here in a pink shirt, Brady's playing football in the middle of US 1 when he first came to Alamorada. I'm like, who's this guy playing football in Alamorada in the highway? He led me down some bad paths himself. I'm a follower, obviously.
I tell you what, let's, for the fun of it, if we could go back to number one, let's just sort of run through these pictures and you guys give a quick narrative, if you would. This is Jimmy. We'll run through real quickly. Back to number one, which is actually of Jimmy. Okay, here's Jimmy, and then you got what, Charlie and Kenny and
Charlie, Kenny.
Yep.
Yeah. Pete.
Is that Pete? Okay.
Pete Montana in the back.
Kenny, Pete Montana. Yeah.
Well, that was your senior picture, John, or is that junior?
Nah, junior or senior. I'm probably senior, maybe. I don't know. I was only 16. I was senior. So.
Well, I tell you, Charlie Broom is back there. One of the things I said before about when you're in 4th to 5th grade, you look at these athletes, but I still contend that Jimmy's senior class was perhaps the greatest group of athletes, and it was a small class. Some of them are here. My brother-in-law Kenny was my hero before he became my brother-in-law. Before he ever dated my sister. And I said to him one time, it's junior year, he had an incredible year. And I said, how many interceptions did you have? I know it's a school record. He said, I think it's 11 or 12. And I asked Coach Allen, he said 13. So that remains a school record. Nobody's even threatened it. And there was a different sound when he hit people. He just, and I think these guys can attest to it. And then, Charlie Broom, I said you could hide a football out there and he would find it. Nose to the ball. And Guy Polson, the quarterback, and Johnny Reeves, what a great all-around athlete. I mean, these are all in the same class. Kenny, Johnny Boggs, Scott Donbeck, who played 3 sports and then became a professional golfer. John Gilliam, who's also a professional golfer and could throw a baseball and hit one out of sight. Dave Makepeace over here, I said valedictorian, but outstanding offensive lineman and played the outfield for a pretty darn good baseball team. And Jimmy Mulharn, I was hoping he would be here. He's now placed down in Marathon, but Chris Sandry, who's still in the community, Pete Simic, who was about that thick. I think Pete, before the days of weight, he would have been a state weightlifting champ.
Pete qualified for the state track meet shortly after I had won the 100 and 200, and he was a shot putter. Pete's dad was a lobsterman, crabber. So Pete could pull 300 traps by hand in a day. These guys out here with the motors and stuff, Pete was pulling these things like they were made out of butter. And one day we're screwing off like we normally do around the locker room. And Pete takes a 16-pound shot put and just throws it. And it hits Richard Rowe in the small of the back. And I had no idea Pete could run that fast. He would have smoked me that day because Lee was going to rip his head off his shoulders. And Lee also qualified for the state track meet as well, as did Ray Cox and Guy Polson. So the 5 of us were the first to qualify.
Well, you mentioned Richard. Richard was in that 68 class. Richard and Lee was great athletes. Rick Zeppernick, I remember even coming. That's a tremendous group of athletes. And really, for a graduating class of 40 or whatever, 20 of them were tremendous athletes, and some of the finest girls as well.
We had 29 in the class of 1967, 29 kids, and then by the next year, Jimmy had how many were in your class?
I think 42 total by then.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was significantly
40. Kenny knows.
So if you would move to that
mile,
move to the next one. I think we've already seen it, but. This was a juxtaposition of Tony before the barber and after the barber.
Yep.
And I think you said, go ahead and cut it short, right?
What's that?
Didn't you say got something to the effect that, as long as I'm here, cut it short?
It was just a precursor to the future.
There you go. That's right. That's right. Just take it all. Just take it all.
If Hannah, if you would go to number 3, let's have you this actually features both of you guys. On the left-hand side is Tony and Donnie Kirk. I think that's Key Club.
Yep.
And that was, you want to share what you're doing there?
That was our senior gift to Coral Shores. Some of you guys will remember that sign sat out there in front of Coral Shores for decades and decades and decades.
And that was an incredible gift to Coral Shores because it's been set there for decades. Now my class had a different idea of a senior gift. We air conditioned C wing where most of the senior classes were held. So we had a little we actually just cared about ourselves the other day, but our class put the first ACs in Coral Shores.
That's funny.
C-wing. Yeah.
Wow.
Fundraiser at the beach in Lower Matacumbi. Thanks to Mr. J. Cox.
Wow.
And to the right is Jimmy and the aforementioned Guy Polson.
I think I was yelling at Richard Gentry there. He told me he's going to be the governor back when he was in ninth grade. I'm going to be the governor. Well, he turned out to be a lobbyist. I don't know how good that worked out.
Yeah, Richard was a 1967 graduate who, here's the basketball team that featured Tony and obviously Guy and Donnie and Jimmy and Scotty and Dale Crawshaw. We got a few Dale Crawshaw stories there, Tony.
But Dale was a phenomenal athlete. He was a great quarterback and ended up becoming a pastor as well. But yeah, that's about the highlight of my basketball career right there. I love to tell basketball teams when I say, guys, don't be discouraged if you're not scoring a bunch of points in basketball. I said, you know how many points I scored in all of high school basketball? Coach Allen would say, he would go, Lefty, you're a linebacker. Don't want you to change anything. And he'd put me in, and he'd say, you got 5 fouls. I expect you to use them all up. And honestly, I averaged about 2 minutes as cleanup at the end of the game. I mean, I was terrible. And but that was actually a pretty good team. We had a pretty good time.
Designated hitter before they were designated hitters. By the way, Dale Crawshaw's father had a significant role in the community. You want to share a little bit about that?
Oh, goodness. Well, was he a surveyor?
He was the surveyor.
Yeah. And Mrs. Crawshaw worked at Coral Shores at the cafeteria forever.
Yeah.
And they were huge influence on my life, obviously, as well.
Yeah, Mr. Crawshaw, he surveyed all the way back into the 30s. Or if you go back and look at some of your plats and so forth, you'll see that he was surveying. Who's this young lady up here that's your?
He walked many a mile for her, trust me.
Yeah. Listen, people ask, how in the world did you ever go from that guy that we've been talking about to who you are now? Well, that's it right there.
Yeah.
Colleen Hammon was Colleen Cullen, and she was my anchor, my rock. We started dating in my senior year and dated all the way through college and then got married in 1972. And Jimmy was one of my groomsmen. David Makepeace was one of my groomsmen. And Johnny Reeves was my best man. So
this actually gives evidence of that, I think. There's Johnny and Dave and
there we are.
Jimmy. And then Fran, and is that
Marianne? Marianne and Fran, and the maid of honor was Marty Dryden.
Okay.
But yeah, that was at San Pedro. Well, it wasn't. Picture wasn't taken at San Pedro, but the wedding took place at San Pedro.
1972.
Yeah, we had been teachers, and so all of our kids came to the wedding, plus all the people that knew the Cullens and all of that. And I remember the priest looking out and going, "Jumping Yemeni, what a wedding!" And it was a full looked like an Easter service.
Hours drawing nigh here, but I wanted to share something too. Prior to that, when you guys were going out, I can remember you bringing a station wagon, driving into my yard. We lived right across from what was the Coral Grill at the time, and the two of you would go out and collect for Aunt Edie and Uncle Neil. That was something that you guys were amazing. Guys were amazing with.
From high school all the way through up into college, we collected marine specimens, tropicals. But I began, this is where my marine biology, put this hat on for a minute, I began to get convicted about the fact that I was seeing the effects of collecting tropicals over and over and over. I would see the cleaner stations weren't being manned by the fish like they were supposed to. And so I quit collecting and started collecting marine specimens for cancer research when I was a student at University of Miami. And it was probably those years of diving and doing all of that led me into the marine biology track there at University of Miami. Back then, they didn't have an undergrad degree in marine biology. So you were biology, and Dave and I were both at University of Miami, and we were called the Keys kids, and were tracked in everything that we did was leading us toward marine biology. And when I came back to intern at Coral Shores, or taught, and then David became my intern along with Angelo Durante. And then when I went down to Start Island Christian School in '74, he took my place. And I tell people all the time, I was the pioneer. I cut the trees because there was no marine biology at Coral Shores at the time, if you can imagine. And I said, we have to have the program. And I had recruited 80 kids already. Had them sign up while I was interning. And I went in and I plotted my marine biology notes down from University of Miami, because Mr. Adair said we don't have any curriculum. I said, we do now. And I plot my notes down. He said, we don't have any kids that I think will need it. I said, I got 80 kids that want to take it next year. And he said, well, we don't have any money. I said, I'll raise the money for the program. You got to pay my salary. Colleen and I are a package deal. You desperately need her to teach business classes. You want her, you have to hire me, and we have to have marine biology. And he smiled and said, I guess you have a job. And that literally is how.
Yeah,
that
Tony and I collected a lot of fish over the course of time.
Yeah.
We did have a moment though with Brian Keith.
Oh,
So we're making big bucks, selling our fish and big. And in those days, you catch blowfish that were 2 feet long.
right.
They were monsters. And we're out in front of Whale Harbor one day, and we're with Brian Keith in a little boat, and we see this fin like that's a big shark, and all of a sudden dollar signs are going ching 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 ching.
$5 a foot.
Kenny's buying our stuff $5
$5 a foot.
at Theater to Sea. So Brian gets the bright idea. We'll knock him out. We'll inch the boat up there and we'll knock him out, and then we'll take him to the Theater to Sea. Like, we're gonna knock out a 12-foot hammerhead. Brian takes an anchor and he gets close and he throws it on a shark and he hits him. And the shark, I guess he thought a mosquito bit him, and he went off about from here to the back of the room and turned around, and he came on a dead run right at the side of the boat, hit the boat, knocked us out of the boat. It was, if you could see,
Cracked a
you
hole
could
in the
say
gunnel.
scramble, we were scrambling. I'm like, well, I think our career as collectors are officially over today. Again, like everything else in our life, it was over after a bunch of mess ups. But yeah, I went on to go, Tony started that. I went, David and I went on to do research on the spider crab with a gentleman that played football, Burgess Owens, who's now a congressman out of Utah. And we know a lot about spider crabs, David and I. Burgess didn't like touching them very often. The biggest ones were 42 inches across. I think we measured one. It was giant. Don't see many spider crabs around anymore either. But we had fun. And of course, again, there was an ulterior motive because we're supposed to be in class, which was, on the boat in Islamorada from the University of Miami. It's a perfect class. How can you fail? And it's funny how something bad leads to something good always. And David ended up teaching my son marine biology.
It's true.
Great circle.
Yeah, and David took that program that I had started with Angelo Durante and took it light years beyond anything I could have done and did do. And that program is still continuing at Coral Shores. So Dave should get tons of credit for marine biology here in Monroe County. He really should.
Now, with that said, though, Art Beck had it wasn't marine biology class, it was the biology class, and we had a lot of aquariums.
Yeah.
And so I know for a fact that several people in this room were involved in feeding an octopus and a moray eel, putting them in the same tank. It was an incredible battle. It was an incredible battle. Little guys. And Mr. Beck was not real pleased about that, nor was he pleased about the rattlesnake in the lab in E-Wing. Those days you catch rattlesnakes on the football field, so it wasn't really a big deal for us to see snakes.
So I have to tell one on Richie Russell.
Just one?
Yeah, just one. I was in my first year of teaching, and so I was a young guy. I was a coach, and a lot of the athletes would come and hang out in my lab, which was in A wing, and of course I was right across from the cafeteria back then, and the restrooms right outside the cafeteria were the place where all the kids that smoked would go, and these guys all began to complain about smoke and how you couldn't even go into the bathroom because the smoke was so thick that you felt like you're getting lung cancer just going in there. And I said to the guys, guys, I've always heard that where there's smoke, there's fire, and we have a civic responsibility to put that fire out. And they all go, Coach. And I'm looking back at the buckets in the back of the lab, and guys, I could never tell you to do something like that. And so the next thing I knew, all these buckets were being filled up with water, and the smoke was billowing out of these bathrooms. And when it started to billow out, I hear all these guys go, fire, fire, and they just doused everybody that was in there. And they came running out the front door, and they doused them out again. And one parent complained, and Coach Allen, who was the principal that year, came and said, you need to come to parent-teacher meeting this week. Somebody's going to have a complaint about what you did. And I said, okay. So I went, and the lady complained. And by the way, her daughter was one of the smokers, but she said, my daughter never smoked. And so Coach Allen, being the brave guy that he was, said, Mr. Hammon, you want to explain your actions? And I stood up and said, we saw smoke. We thought there was a fire. We tried to put it out. And I sat down. End of story. That was it. No more, no less.
That's 12 to 15 right now, probably.
Yeah. Can you imagine doing that today in today's educational system?
I don't know, that might be a good wrap-up place.
Yeah.
I think we could go on, probably to midnight. You guys are incredible storytellers, and Lord knows you got libraries of stories. But I thank you for sharing the ones that you did. We might try to do this again sometime. But I'll end where I started, and that's just saying that I consider it an honor and a privilege to call you friends. You've long been people I admired, and on behalf of a community and really far beyond, we thank you for being difference makers, and we thank you for everything you contributed and all the lives that you touched, and we appreciate you sharing some of those special times growing up in the Keys.
Well, thank you, Rich. The stories there's a lot of stories we can't tell. It just simply cannot be told in public, just because they cannot be told in public. And there's people in this room that are part of them. But, growing up here was special. It really was. And it's as great a place this is today. It is nothing like it was in the day. I mean, you hear that across the country, I know, but the Keys are a special place. And, to develop friendships. I mean, I coached Richie in Little League, Pony League in high school. Not many people can say that. I was a Pony Leaguer coaching Little League and a high school player coaching Pony League. And he ends up 45 years now or 44 years in the system as an athletic director. And I'm so proud of you, Rich, and, having many of the kids I coached become coaches. They were going to be engineers and could have been anybody they wanted. They all become football, baseball coaches, and sort of cool. And still riding my first surfboard, the Purple Demon. So, yeah, it says a lot about where we lived and how we grew up and what this place still is. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys. And I think, we're talking about the coaching. I think how blessed I was to have you two as models. And obviously, Coach Allen, he'll always be coach. He doesn't need the Allen to follow. And then, Paul Gruey and Mike Young. And these are just wonderful people, great coaches, but great role models. People that made lifelong differences, and just as Coach did with each of us.
I was looking out. So many of you in this room I've known almost my whole life. And I think about how important that is to this community, and how, quite honestly, we need to strive together to maintain those friendships and that family spirit that this place. I mean, when you hear a community, this defines what community is about. And people in this room represent the legacy of the Florida Keys and people that have gone on before us. And I just think, as we see the Keys changing, I want to just encourage all of us to stay connected as we are. And we have something beautiful and valuable, and we live in paradise. When I asked Colleen, who is still teaching swimming every day, would you ever want to live anyplace else? She goes, why? Why would we ever want to live anyplace else? This is paradise. And it really is, but we have to fight to keep it as paradise. And that's an important part of what we do and who we are. And just thank you. And I am grateful for the years that I've had to be an educator here in the Keys and be a pastor here in the Keys. And now I'm trying to teach that to other people in other countries and to keep that going. One of these days I'm going to get old, but it's still out there a way off. So I just
Way
enjoy it.
off there, too.
Yeah, way off.
Tony can't pass away till I do because he has to tell stories. After that, he's on his own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, guys, thank you again. I thank each of you for attending and look forward to, hopefully you'll be at the next lecture as well. We'll pass out the entire series. You can become regulars, but thank you. Hope you've enjoyed as much as I do. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jimmy.